Hey everyone, it's Jay here. This is part 2 of automating messages as an Airbnb host. So in the part 1 video, we dealt with replacing the simple variable of a guest name. We created a really simple macro to do this that sort of saved you a little bit of time, but in part 2, we'll go through expanding on this and creating a more full macro that will enable you to reply to lots of different messages and automate lots of different things. Now, this does apply to Airbnb for this example, but of course, you can apply these ideas to other messages you'd like to automate, like emails or messages in other apps like to-do apps. So first of all, I'm going to show you the macro in action, just so you can see what we're looking to achieve. So here I've got my Airbnb app, and I'm just going to reply to a message. So as before with part 1, I'm going to type in my trigger, which is air with an extra R on the end. And this is, first of all, going to ask us to select the type of message that we want. So I'm just going to do number 1, thanks for booking. And you can see, compared to part 1, I've added a few more different details in. So I'm just going to change this to what I've got here, which is someone who's called Inez. Number of guests 2, number of nights, let's do 7 nights because that's what they're staying for. And check-in time, I'm just going to do 1300. So lots of these prompts actually won't be necessarily relevant to the message that I've selected, but I'm just going to fill them in anyway because they're persistent. So when I send the other emails, these variables will stay there. I'm just going to press OK, and then let's say they come from Gatwick Airport, and you can see that this pastes in this message. So I think in this particular message, only the name is inserted as a variable. The rest of the message, I'm just sort of asking them questions like which airport are they going to come from. And I have a flexible check-in time, so that's not variable either. So let's try a different one. So let's try check-in. I'm just going to do Gatwick Airport again. And here you can see there's a few other variables that have now been inserted. So hello, their name, yeah, I will be at the flat a few hours either side of your planned check-in time of 1 o'clock. Remember, that was a variable, so that's something I haven't had to type. Because I've selected that they're coming from Gatwick, I'm assuming that they've told me this in between these messages. I've automatically added directions from the Gatwick airport. Because these messages can be quite long, and I don't really want to add extra directions if they're not necessary, because the longer the message, the less likely they are to read it. Let's try a different message. Arrival. This is a pretty standard message that doesn't have that many customizations, but again, I've taken the opportunity to add some. So if I scroll down, so by this point, I would have known, because they've just arrived, whether they drink coffee or not. So some people just don't drink coffee at all, and it's not really worth me adding a message about the coffee machine, etc., if they don't drink coffee. But because I've selected yes, this has added in some text from here onwards about the coffee machine. So I've said that I would have freshly ground some coffee for them and put it in their room. And it also says if you want to use the coffee bean blender, then let me know and I'll show them how it works. Another customization I've got here is about the laundry. Now in my instance, I let them use the washing machine once if they're here for maybe 3 days. If they're here for over 3 days or over 3 nights, I will let them use it twice. Or otherwise, I charge a fee for the wash. And the only reason I've done this is because I have had people that have come here and sort of put like 3 washes on during the day. Other people want to use the washing machine and it takes up a lot of energy. So I've put a limit on this and I've added a message in here depending on how many nights they're staying. So I'll just show you how this differs. I'm going to take out the coffee and change them to stay a few less nights, which means that the washing machine will only be available to use once. Of course, you might not have this, but this is giving you ideas of the kind of things that you can do. So I'm just going to fill in this again. And I'm going to do arrival. And this time, they're not going to be coffee drinkers. And they're going to stay for 2 nights. There's no longer a message about the coffee machine. It's a shorter section. And under laundry, it says the washing machine is free to use once. So that's another example of how I've customized it depending on the variables of the guest. Let's do after the first night they've arrived. Again, this is there's no variables in here apart from their name, but that's cool. It still saves me a bit of time. And the rest of the messages are pretty standard, and I think it's just their name that I've personalized, but I'll just show you them so you can see. So this one, yeah, it's just their name, and this is just about the checkout process. And then apart from that, where the numbers end, I've just got some sort of non-standard messages that I sometimes get asked. So for example, is the area noisy? Is there parking available, etc. But I left out the numbers of these because they're non-standard, whereas these first 5 emails I know I'm definitely going to send. But all in all, I know I'm going to send these emails over and over again, and this is a much faster way of doing it now. And crucially, it's also personalized to them. And I don't have to remember the logic of including certain instructions or not including certain instructions. So with all that, let's go and recreate this macro. It's quite a detailed macro, and you can make yours a lot simpler, but this is how I would do it in real life, or rather how I have done it in real life. Now I've got a complete version of this here, and I'm just going to sort of recreate this as a separate macro. So let me disable this. Then let's do a new macro and call it Airbnb. So again, we've got the type string trigger, which will be air. And I'm going to use a couple of shortcuts here to make this a bit faster. So normally you could click action and it would bring up a list of all the actions. Then you would need to click the filter button to find what you want. What I tend to do is I tend to use something called insert action by name. Unfortunately, you can't see the menu on my second monitor, but if you go edit, insert, action by name, you'll see that there's a keyboard shortcut associated with it, which is Control plus Command plus A. And this will bring up a sort of quick search box that will enable you to type in the action that you want, but it will help me speed up this video. So let me do that. The first thing I want to do is add just some notes. So I'm going to go Control plus Command plus A, which will bring up the search box. And you can see it already says comment because that was the last thing I typed. But normally it would be add action, and I would just search comment and hit enter. It's just a faster way of adding these things. So the first thing I would do is just add some notes to sort of tell me more about the macro, which I'll fill in later. So the next thing I want to do is prompt with a list. So I'm going to go and pause the video and just fill this in with what we had from the previous video. So if you remember, we had a few things before. I think we maybe had thanks for booking and a couple of tests. So I've expanded this now. So I've given us, I've just typed in these things. So I've done to check-in, for example. This is just me typing. And of course, you can have a few different others or a few less if you don't use them. The important thing here is I think the default is it saves it to the system clipboard, but we want to save it to a variable, which is Airbnb message type, because we'll use this variable to test for the message type later on. Then we had another prompt, a prompt for user input. Again, I'm going to pause the video and just sort of recreate what we had last time. So if you remember, we had the guest details. And here, I've added this example in the prompts sort of details here where we can remember just what some of the variable options are. So before we had guest name, I've added in a few more extra variables here, number of guests, which we'll use to customize the welcome email. So we might say, if there's just one guest, we might say, I'm looking forward to making you comfortable. If there's multiple guests, we might say, I'm looking forward to making both of you comfortable. Then we've got the number of nights, and this will be used for the logic to determine how many times I'm allowing them to use the washing machine for free. Again, I'm not tight, it's just to make sure that they don't take advantage. Next, we've got the check-in time, which is just to remind them that I'm only going to be here a couple of hours before or after that. And the last variable is about whether they drink coffee or not, because if they don't, then I'm not going to give them instructions for the coffee machine. Aside from these extra variables I've added, the only other difference is I've added some variables in the input here. This may look confusing, but this is just, if I get rid of this, you'll see that normally this is a default value. So as the default value, I'm putting the actual variable. And what this means is that these variables will be pre-filled out when I go to repeat the macro. So for example, you can see that it already has inputted these variables that I had from last time. And this just means that when I go to repeat, email 1 to 5, I don't have to keep on entering these variables in every time. We're now going to do another prompt with list to ask them a final set of questions. So again, Control Command A, and we've already got prompt with list up here. So I'm just going to hit enter. And in this prompt, I'm going to ask them, which airport are you coming from? I'm going to assume that most people come to my flat from Gatwick, so I'll put that as a default. And if you remember last time, we want to select a text list because we're going to type out the options ourselves. And you just separate the options by a different line for each one. Instead of saving this to the clipboard, we're going to save it to a variable, and we're going to call it airport. And this means later on, we're going to say if they've selected Gatwick Airport, then add in this text about the directions. If they've selected Heathrow, then give them these directions instead. Now, typically what I'll do is I'll try and make the macro a bit more digestible by breaking it into different sections. So in this case, we've sort of finished asking for all the different input that we need. And so I'm going to put a comment here, a colored comment below this, just to visually separate it from the rest of the macro where we're doing calculations and entering messages in. So I'm going to go Control Command A to bring this up, and I'm going to search for comment, hit enter. So this puts a comment in, and you can format this however you want, but I tend to do nice big capital letters, and then a few dashes, and then I'll do calculations. So we're going to now perform a few different calculations so that we can tailor the messages. You can also set this to a color. So normally if I'm beginning a section, I set this as green, like green is go. Now we're going to add an if statement. So I'm going to search for if then else. And this if statement is just going to allow us to say if the variable is saved like this. So if we've said, for example, that the number of guests is 2, then we want to do this. If not, then we want to do that. So let's read this. If all the following are true. So we want to select the condition as variable condition. In this case, if the variable number of guests. So these signs here, these sort of math signs, we want to do if greater than. So this means greater than. And we want to say if greater than or equal to 2. So if there's 2 or more guests, then we want to do this. So let's do set variable to text. So we actually want a different variable here. We don't want number of guests because we want to keep that for the input here. So we want to save number of guests result. And this is going to be the text that we enter in the email. So I'm going to call it U2. You'll see where I'm going with this in a second. So if it's not equal or greater than 2, then we're going to set this to just U. So under here, we're going to, again, set variable to text, number of guest results, and we're going to set this to U. And this calculation will allow us to customize the text in our message. Next up, we're going to do something very similar, but we're going to do some calculations on the number of nights. Because remember, what we want to do is, if they're staying over a certain number of nights, we want to change the washing machine message. So again, let's do an if then else statement, and it's kind of going to be the same as this one up here. So in fact, in this example, to make it easier, I'm just going to duplicate this. So you can right click and say duplicate, and we're going to change a few things. So number of nights instead, and in this case I want to change the message if they stay for more than, not equal to, just more than 3 nights. And let's change this. So number of nights results instead, number of nights result. But in fact, we may want to use this number of nights for something else at a later date. So I'm just going to call this number of nights washing result, because this is specifically a message about the washing. So if they're staying greater than 3 nights, we want to say the washing machine is free to use twice. But if not, the washing machine is free to use once. Almost done. So the final calculation we're going to do is just around the coffee. So again, I'm going to duplicate this. Remember, you can right click and press duplicate, or you can just do Command D, which is a bit quicker. And I'm going to say if coffee drinkers, and I'm just going to do is Y for yes. And here we're going to do coffee drinkers result. So I've just told them some things if they're going to use the coffee machine. Now, if they don't drink coffee, we still need to put this in. We're just going to set it to blank, and this will reset the variable. So if I change it in future, it's not going to keep hold of this. It's going to set it to 0 effectively. So now that we've finished the calculations, I'm just going to add a comment again, comment, and I'm going to go end calculations.